Good morning, Maddie. How you doing? How is Padia treating you? I hope well. I assume well. I'm sure it's treating you well. Everything's great here on Turtle Beach. I woke up early this morning, as often happens, and nothing else to do. So I'm going to read you a few more stories from Thai Vignettes. Is that backwards? I don't know why the camera in this iteration turns stuff around, but whatever. All right, what are we up to? Jailbait. This story, I was the warden for the U.S. consulate on Phuket, very briefly, like 6 months. Didn't like the job. It wasn't a job, it's a volunteer position. My only real duty was visiting Americans who were put in the prison on Phuket. In those days, you could take the magazines and cigarettes and check on them, make sure they were healthy, they were seen by a doctor if they got sick, which was frequent. Everybody's sick in an Asian prison, I suppose. But it was just too depressing. People make really bad decisions. 2 cases I remember specifically. One guy pushed a bar girl off a cliff and killed her, American guy. And he was just absolutely at sea. He went back and forth between not believing, why are they taking this so seriously? She was just a bar girl, and I was just drunk. I just made a mistake, and I made a mistake, and I was drunk, and I pushed her off the cliff. We were arguing. But, why am I facing life in an Asian jail? And he would go back and forth between that and crying fits about he loved her and he misses her and he's sorry he killed her. And then this case that I wrote about in this story, and it just got too depressing, so I quit. All right, I got a coffee. I got a glass of water. I got the phone plugged in, so hopefully the battery won't die. Jailbait. Give me a paragraph to get warmed up, bud. Missionary Mike took a going away present to Meg and Ann yesterday. Meg is skinny and blonde with an angular face and tiny, close-set eyes that make her look like some kind of large albino rodent. Anne is short and plump with thin brown hair that she keeps piled up on the top of her head. Anne dropped out of high school to marry a local boy. 5 years later, the local boy had ditched her. She was working in a fast food restaurant to support herself and her 2 infant kids. Meg dropped out of high school because she wasn't smart enough to keep up. She took a few jobs around town, and she ran away from home to the nearest big city. There, she took whatever kind of work she could get. She was waiting tables in a coffee shop next to a bus station when she met Omo. Omo sold fake Rolex watches outside the bus depot, and he ran the occasional 3-card Monte game. He took Meg to a disco that night, then to a bar, and then to bed. The next day, he moved his few possessions into her rented room, and he gave her a fake Rolex. It was the first time any man had paid much attention to the gawky, bony, simple girl. And she was head over heels in love. After a week of dancing, sex, and living off of Meg's money, Omo told her that he wanted to take her on a trip. He had friends who would pay for the tickets and pay them a lot of money as well, he said. And all they'd have to do is carry a small suitcase out of Asia. Meg was dumb as a box of rocks, and she was desperately afraid of losing her man. So she said yes. Omo told her that it'd be very risky for a single woman, or a white woman and a black man, to get anything past Asian customs officers, but two white women traveling together would look just like every other tourist. He asked if she had any friends who would like a free ticket to Asia and $10,000 in return for providing a bit of set dressing. And Meg thought of her cousin Anne. Anne was finding it impossible to support her kids on minimum wage. She told Meg she'd go with them, but she didn't ever want to touch the bag or know what was inside it. She thought she could protect herself this way. Anne wasn't much smarter than Meg. The trio made its way to Bangkok, where Omo checked them into a single room on Khao San Road and divided his time between mysterious meetings in the coffee shop downstairs and trying to get Anne to join him and Meg in bed. After a week, he came back to the room one midnight with a cheap vinyl suitcase and an announcement. They'd be flying to Phuket the next day, since the police at little provincial airports would be much less observant than those in a big city. Of course, Phuket is not your average little province. When the very striking trio of foreigners arrived at the airport, they were noticed by everybody wearing a uniform, from the chief of immigration down to the women who cleaned the bathrooms. When Omo bought 2 tickets for the girls, Phuket to Singapore to Zurich, leaving the next day, and one for himself, Phuket to Karachi to Zurich, leaving 4 hours later, red flags went up on computers all the way from Phuket to Washington to Lagos. The local cops let the would-be smugglers take a taxi into town. After all, why should the provincial government pay for transporting prisoners when they can be left alone for an hour and they'll pay for it themselves? They were in their hotel room only 7 minutes when the knock on the door came. Some very polite officers searched the room, found a lot of heroin sewn into the lining of the vinyl suitcase. The police didn't even ask, whose is this? Because all 3 had signed the register at check-in, and under the law, all 3 were responsible for anything in that room. They were taken to Phuket's quaint little provincial prison, where not one of them noticed the distinctive Sino-Portuguese architecture. The exercise yard there is separated by a barbed wire fence, girls on one side, boys on the other. For 2 days, Omo and Meg met at the fence and whispered sweet endearments across it. Then Meg's lawyer told her that Omo was claiming she was the boss and he'd know nothing. Even Meg understood what that meant, and she stopped going to the fence. The wheels of law grind slowly in Thailand, but they grind extremely fine. Anne pleaded innocent, telling the judge she hadn't known what was in the bag, which was true. And to her credit, Meg corroborated her cousin's story. But because of the innocent plea, the trial was even further delayed. And when the sentencing came, Meg, the imbecile mastermind, got 25 years, as did Omo the seducer. But Anne, the reluctant conspirator, got 33 years. Their consulate could do nothing. The warden could do nothing. And their families had disowned them. Yesterday, when Mike took them a bag of cigarettes and fashion magazines for the bus trip up to the women's prison in Bangkok, he found Anne weeping over a photo of her kids. But Meg was in a bright and chipper mood. Mike asked her why she was so happy. And she said, because today they're taking us in a van over to Surat Thani for the train to Bangkok. Yeah, so? Meg sighed and looked at Mike like he was the stupid one. I'm finally going to see the ocean, she said. I've been on Phuket for 18 months and I ain't never seen the beach. Pretty much word for word. I don't know. I would assume Meg and Anne had their sentences commuted by the previous monarch at some point, maybe 5 years, 6 years, 7 years into their sentence. Typically, you're sent home with an agreement that your government will incarcerate you for the remaining period of your sentence for the rest of the 25 and 33 years. But I think in most cases, your Western governments wait a couple years and then commute your sentence. Isn't that so typically Thai, though? Because Meg said, truthfully, I didn't know what was in the bag. I was just traveling along. Because that caused more work for the authorities, she got 33 years. The woman and the guy who set the whole thing up got 25 years each. The woman who was just set dressing, she got 33 years because she caused extra work for the authorities. This is Thailand, baby. The searchers. Oh, I like this story. Again, almost word for word. A lot of these stories, had their genesis in events, things that happened, right? I had to turn in a story to the Nation every Thursday for publication on Sunday. I had to come up with something every week. And usually there'd just be a little spark in an incident. So I was sitting in a noodle shop, and this old guy came by and I wrote about it. It's called The Searchers. Again, all of these titles are famous movies. Excuse me, sir. You know one girl named Lek? Shaky Derek looked up from his noodles and scanned the guy. Old, maybe 70, maybe 50. Battered rubber flip-flops, worn out shorts, faded flannel shirt, and round his waist, a plaid pakao in a northeastern pattern. Derek decided that whatever the old guy was selling, he didn't want any. No, he said. It was a lie, of course. Half the women in Thailand are named Lek. Derek went back to his noodles. Eating noodles takes a lot of concentration. Not everything in the bowl is meant to be eaten. The old guy shuffled over to the next table and repeated his question. The place is pretty full. It's close enough to the beach to augment its Thai lunch crowd with tourists. The old man asked the Thai diners his question in very polite Thai. He gave the Farang the same line he had given Derek. Excuse me, sir. You know one girl named Lek? He got a lot of blank stares and rude brush-offs. As Derek gleaned the last bits of edible stuff from the dregs in his bowl, the old man had made his way around the room and was coming past Derek's table again. Derek noticed the look on his face, and it surprised him. Any street peddler who worked a room full of working-class Thais and resort-class tourists and came away with nothing would have been disappointed. A 5-year-old flower girl could have made a fortune in there, and any bar girl who approached that many prospects and came away empty would have quit the business. But the old man had the same calm, bemused face he'd worn into the place. Whoever Lek was, Derek thought, this old guy is used to looking for. Derek paid his bill and went out into the glare and dust of the street. He rolled down his sleeves and pulled the brim of his cap way down over his eyes. And as he turned up the street, he saw the old man again. He was standing under the awning of the pharmacy next door to the noodle shop. He was looking across the street at a row of girly bars, most of them vacant this time of year. The ones that were still operating through the low season were closed, of course. Their employees would only be halfway through today's sleep. The old man stared at the shuttered bar fronts with eyes surrounded by millions of tiny wrinkles and creases. It's called the Isan squint. It comes from years spent looking down into the sun's reflection in the murky sludge of a rice paddy. Squatting on the ground next to the old man was a younger man with the round, bland face of a Down syndrome victim. The young man was rolling a cigarette with banana leaves and rough local tobacco. As Derek passed, he watched the boy's technique. And without even looking down at his hands, the boy rolled a perfect spliff, even though he was missing the first knuckle of his right index finger. Derek walked past them on his way to the pharmacy, and as he passed, the old guy said to him, "Excuse me, sir, you know one girl named Lek?" He didn't remember Derek. "No, I still don't," Derek said. Yeah. And he brushed past him. But while he waited for the Chinese druggist to look up his order in the PDR, Derek began to feel a little guilty. The old man was obviously a loon, but a dozen major theologies said that Derek should show him a little compassion. And being snotty to someone old enough to be his grandfather, who was a bit of a loon himself, made Derek feel like a schmuck. Derek could see the guy through the front window of the drugstore, squatting next to the boy now, still looking at the quiet bars across the street. When the clerk finally bagged up his purchase, he asked for a pack of smokes, and then he asked the clerk to make it 2 packs. Yeah, they sold cigarettes in pharmacies back then. Out on the street, Derek walked over to the old man. He was hunkered down in that third world way, scant weight resting on big square feet, bony elbows on bony knees. He jumped up when Derek approached and started into, "Excuse me, sir, you know one girl." But this time he recognized the foreigner. "Name Lek, right?" Derek said. The old man brightened a bit, but then he saw Derek was kidding. He gave up a small grin and nodded and began to settling maneuvers that would eventually deliver him back down to the pavement. Derek dug into his plastic bag for the spare smokes. By the time he found them, the old man had resettled, and Derek handed them down to him. He said in northeastern Thai, no, I'm not a beggar." And he tried to wave the pack away. Derek said, "Come on, it's okay." He slipped the Krong tips into the pocket of the old man's shirt. The old man immediately gave Derek a Y, fingertips pressed together at his eyebrows. Derek reflexively Y'd back, his hands held over the part in his hair, and he said, "Bop." The word means sin in Thai, or in this case, serious social faux pas. Because he's an older man, Y'ing a younger man, that's bop. You don't do that. Derek's reflexive bop made the old man's jaw drop and his hands. "Hey, you can speak," he said in that weird half Lao, half Thai they use up on the drought plains. "I get by. Pa chadai," Derek answered. Since they had begun to converse, Derek tried his best to hunker down like the old man and the boy. And he ended up in that painful and embarrassing posture that CNN reporters assume when they try to make the natives feel at ease. The old man bit off the corner of the pack of smokes and offered Derek one with a flourish. He took one himself and, carefully closing the foil over the tiny hole he'd made in the top of the pack, returned them to his pocket. I don't know if I've seen that recently. Do old Thai men still bite the corner off a pack of cigarettes so that they can close the foil and keep the cigarettes dry because they're always outdoors? They're always getting rained on, or they're always knee-deep in a paddy and wet. I haven't seen that this time. Do old Thai men still do that up in Pattaya? Maddie? I don't know. The boy was staring at Derek with that bland, friendly gaze that Downs babies carry through their brief, gentle lives. Derek asked the old man, "Doesn't he want one?" And the old man answered, "No, he likes his own." As if to prove it, the boy began to roll another. His lips and teeth were stained brown in the middle. Derek watched his truncated finger pat the moist tobacco into the stiff tube of banana leaf, and he asked the old man what happened to his finger. "Snake bit it," the old man said without emotion. They sat in the shade enjoying their smokes for another minute without speaking. As Derek butted his on the ground and made motions toward levering himself back upright, the old man pulled a battered wallet out of his pocket and he dug a photograph out of it. He held Derek down by an arm and showed him the picture. It was a typical unsmiling, white-bloused driver's license or school ID photo showing a youngish Thai woman with long hair and a broad, flat nose. "This is Lek," the old man said. The photo was old, but how old Derek couldn't tell. Could have been a year or 10 years since Lek stood in front of the neutral gray wall and looked into the lens. "I need to find her," the old man said with an edge of urgency in his voice. "I need to tell her that I forgive her." Derek tisk-tisked, handed him back the photo and wished him luck. His knees popped as he stood and he swayed against the wall for a moment. The boy grinned up at him and the old man smiled. "Farang," he said, and he shook his head. As Derek walked away, the old man shouted at his back, "I want to tell her I'm sorry. I'm sorry, and I forgive her." Derek drove home, wondering who she was, this girl named Lek. The old man's wife, his daughter, the boy's mother, or his sister. And how long had the odd couple been searching for her? He stopped off at Ocean Department Store to buy some kitty litter. The employees there wear name badges. And at the cash register, he gave his money to one girl named Lek. Half the women in Thailand are named Lek. So that's another transcription of an event. There's no creative writing really in that, except I call myself Derek. Some of these were written in the first person for the newspapers or the magazines, but in compiling this manuscript, I made everything third person, omniscient observer fiction. This one's called Barfly. What's this about? Oh, this is about my ex-wife. Early on in the relationship, we had a detente. We were tolerating each other and we were pumping out kids at an unbelievable rate. And we were both very fertile, apparently, and we just produced children like in the blink of an eye, the two of us. But there was a time there on Phuket that we got along. We were never in love, but we got along. We had a partnership. We were running a business together, the firm, like the royal family, anywhere. And this story was written during the détente, so it is fairly flattering of Mem. But it describes what she did as the public relations manager of a swanky hotel. Barfly. Oh, I even call her by her real name. Yeah, well, I guess I will continue to do so. Or 30 years later, what's it matter, right? Mem took a couple of VIPs to the lumberyard last night. Back in Australia, they're just the managers of a medium-sized tour agency. But in Phuket, anybody who can book out 10 rooms a week through the low season is considered a very important person. As the hotel's PR manager, it's up to Mem to show them a good time while they're enjoying their free rooms and inspecting the hotel. The lumberyard is the only yuppie bar on Phuket, owned and operated by a couple of young Thais who were schooled abroad and brought home the vital knowledge that atmosphere sells. The place is paneled in dark wood, but not teak, since that would be politically incorrect, and decorated with sports memorabilia and over-fertilized ferns. The entertainment last night was a young Thai woman who sang blues ballads in a fair approximation of Billie Holiday if Billie had been born in Lampang. She was not. Don't Google it. Billie Holiday was not born in Lampang. It was pretty crowded. Every table was occupied by groups of bank clerks and secretaries and middle managers and administrators. On each table was a centerpiece of Johnny Walker bottles and ice buckets. This younger generation eschews the drink caddies of their parents, and they don't put ice in their beer. They all watch TV, and they know it isn't the way someone wearing a Rolex should party. The light is kept just bright enough in the lumberyard for everyone to see the USA tax stamp on their neighbors' Marlboros. Yeah, cigarettes were contraband, man. Cops could stop you for having American cigarettes. As Mem automatically scanned the crowd looking for people important enough to go and greet, she noticed a couple of men seated against the far wall who were so emblematic of a certain type that she immediately knew everything about them. They were older than most of the crowd, probably in their mid-40s, and though they were already well into their second bottle of Chivas and displaying the loud laughter and backslapping one would associate with a good time, she got the impression they were a little nervous. Their eyes kept shifting to the tables around them, more than was necessary in a place that's all about seeing and being seen. It looked as if they were studying their neighbors. Mem assumed that this was the usual business meeting of traditional male-dominated Asian commerce, where one man shows another a good time in return for certain favors to be determined later. Normally, a meeting like that would begin in a Chinese restaurant, proceed to a sing-a-song bar, and end up in a massage parlor or a short-time hotel. But the climate of business in the kingdom is rapidly shifting, nowhere more so than on Phuket. This was probably written about 92, 93. Whoever was the host of this tete-a-tete had probably heard his younger colleagues raving about the lumberyard as the new networking nexus, and he brought his guests there hoping to impress by being as up-to-date as the Young Turks. Well, it's saying low battery mode is plugged into the, who knows? I'm not a techie. Unfortunately for him, so he's trying to pretend to be as up-to-date as the young people. Unfortunately for him, it didn't seem to be working. It was probably the first time either of these two guys had ever gone bite, Tiao, in a place where they couldn't buy out the waitresses, and they had no idea what the rules were. Rules are very important to Thais. A Thai businessman would rather eat dirt than commit a faux pas. Still true, always. It'll always be true. They perched on their wrought iron Art Deco cafe chairs, smoking and eating at the same time. Periodically, they would clutch at each other and whisper, then break into fits of high-pitched giggling, a sure sign that an Asian man is talking about women. They would ogle the waitresses and the other women in the room, but stopped short at saying anything. That was a waste, since both of them had spent their adult lives building up a store of risque flirtation and lewd comments for use in such situations. They were trying to hide their awkwardness by drinking fast and smoking like chimneys. The chanteuse had launched into Unforgettable by Nat King Cole. Unforgettable, that's what you are. An obvious favorite of the crowd, who all clapped enthusiastically. The two businessmen looked about in confusion. Where they usually go, nobody ever claps, let alone at the beginning of a song. One of them made a few tentative pats, palm to palm, and then he let his hands slide under the table in embarrassment. Finally, the two VIPs from Australia made a verbal agreement with Mem to ship many plane loads of Aussie dollars to her hotel, a deal which Mem sealed by asking for the check. She went to the bar and presented her 10% discount card, paid the tab, and circled the room, making her goodbyes. Mem came back to the table, stuffing business cards into her wallet. The two Australians levered themselves out of the booth, and they started to head for the door. They were halfway across the room when it happened. One of them, while squeezing past a happy gang of young urban professionals, gave a young lady in the group a pinch on her bottom. Pandemonium broke loose. The woman complained long and loud to her date, and suddenly Mem's two guests were surrounded by angry young men in polo shirts and wire-rimmed glasses. Mem stepped in and made apologies, and since she is P-Mem, known far and wide as a mover and shaker, and she was, the belligerents backed down, satisfied that their posturing had redeemed the honor of the offended lady. Mem ordered a round of drinks for the kids and hustled the two yabos out the front door. Then she listened to them complain all the way back to Cotta Beach about how oversensitive Asians are. As she listened, she thought about what she had seen as she backed out of the lumberyard. She had glanced around the room, ready to dodge a thrown beer bottle should it come, and her sight lingered on the two older businessmen. They were sitting bolt upright in their uncomfortable but stylish chairs, bug-eyed and slack-jawed, staring with glee at the scene at the door. Any trace of awkwardness had left their faces. They looked like kids at the circus. This was what they were used to. The behavior of the two Farang had been exactly what they would have done in the same situation. In their world, a well-packed pair of Calvin Kleins in a smoky bar is begging for a grope. The fact that it had been Westerners who had done it in that Hollywood-inspired replica of a Western watering hole validated their own values. Mem was sure that from the moment she left the bar, those two guys began to exercise their obscene banter with the waitresses and request old Thai ballads from the torch singer, just as they would have done in any roadside joint strung with Christmas tree lights and staffed by tired girls who would just as soon go out with a customer as run around balancing trays of Mekong and Coke. So much for the New World Order. So that would have come from Mem's description of a night out. I don't remember writing this story or for what market or what editor or what I got paid for it. Well, the rate was 4 baht a word back then. These are all 1,000 words. So each of these I would have been paid 4,000 baht, which I think was our rent for a month. And I sold for a month just to the nation. So 16,000 baht a month just from that one newspaper. So it's pretty good. It's a pretty good income. The job at the hotel was the primary income, but the writing paid for a lot. And this is very early. Oh, this would have been before children. She was still working. Once she got pregnant, the hotel she was working for fired her. They didn't want a PR manager who was obviously pregnant. And man, you could do that in Thailand. Perhaps you still can. Fire a woman for getting pregnant. An executive who's really good at her job, known far and wide all over the island as the best PR manager on the island. And, oh, no, you're pregnant. Out you go. Yeah. Thailand, man, you gotta love it. Oh, I'm pretty sure I've read this in front of a camera before, but I'll go ahead and read it again, Maddie. It's called Two for the Road. And again, this comes out of a conversation I had with a woman named Karen Smith, who was an American woman. She and her husband ran the Rock Hard A Go-Go on Patong Beach. It was at the corner of Soi Bangla and Songroi Pi Road, I think, or Ratu Tit. Anyway, the first big intersection, you come off the beach, you go up Soi Bangla, the first big four-way, and that's like, ground zero. That's the center of everything in Patong was then. And Karen and her husband Larry ran the Rock Hard, and Karen was this wonderful woman from Minnesota. Have another cup of coffee, Steve. That's terrible Minnesota accent, sorry. But the hard R's of the Midwest were pleasing to me, and they're just like mine. So I used to go hang out. She'd give me free orange juice, and I'd hang out with her in front of the bar and hear bar stories. So this was a bar story that Karen told me. Two for the road, it's called. Eduardo went home from Phuket today in Royal Orchid class. Oi went home in a cheap brass urn. Eduardo's leg stuck out into the aisle in a hip-to-toe plaster cast, which would annoy the flight attendants all the way from Bangkok to Rome. He also had a broken collarbone, a dislocated elbow, and a hairline fracture in his left orbit, the ring of bone that contains the eyeball. He had 2 stainless steel pins in his femur, which would set off airport metal detectors for the rest of his life. Oi was 8 ounces of ash and a few chips of bone. Eduardo's summer vacation cost him 75,000 baht for plane tickets and hotel accommodation. The vacation cost Eduardo's father 50,000 baht for the lawyer, 50,000 baht for the police, 50,000 baht to repair the front end of the parked pickup truck that Eduardo hit head-on at 60 kilometers an hour, and 20,000 baht for Oi's funeral. He paid 50,000 baht to Oi's family and 200,000 baht for the 450cc motorcycle Eduardo had wrecked. Eduardo's vacation had cost Oi her life, and nobody concerned questioned that a 2-year-old motorcycle should be worth 4 times what that life was worth. When Eduardo hit the parked truck, the motorcycle jammed its front wheel under the trunk's bumper, and pivoting on the hub of that wheel acted like a 6-foot-long lever. Eduardo was thrown over the trunk's cab, smashing his leg on the windshield in passing to land in the cargo bed. Because she was perched behind him on the extreme outer end of the lever, Oi was catapulted 50 feet before landing on her face in the middle of the road. She was probably dead by clinical standards the moment she hit the pavement, but at any rate, she slid another 10 feet before coming up hard against the curb, head first. When the embassy notified Eduardo's family of the accident, his brother Gino called a friend of a friend of a friend who imports Italian wines into Bangkok. The friend Cube flew down to Phuket and handled all the arrangements, including the delivery of a few plates of spaghetti carbonara into the holding cell at Phuket's provincial prison, where Eduardo was held for a day after his release from the hospital. Oi's mother, father, 2 brothers, 1 sister-in-law, and 4 nieces all came down from Korat on the bus, with the kids riding in the adults' laps for the entire 27-hour journey to save the cost of 4 more tickets. They showed up on Wednesday morning at the Go-Go Bar where Oi had worked. And that was the first that the management or Oi's co-workers learned about the accident. Eduardo had never sent word. It was the police who wired Oi's family, taking the address from the ID card found in her purse. Eduardo waited for his court appearance in a 4-star hotel, holding a bag full of ice to his face and watching Star TV with one eye. Part of the time he spent thinking of a story to tell his fiancée about how he broke his leg. Oi waited for her funeral in a locker at the local health department's cold storage facility. Oi's family spent 2 nights in Oi's room in the apartment, which she had shared with 3 other girls. In the room, beside a bed and a vanity table, were a new TV and VCR, a lot of stuffed animals, and a dozen photo albums. Nothing had been touched since Oi had last been there, and under the mattress, Oi's father found an envelope with almost 5,000 baht in it. There was also a camera in the room, and it held a partially exposed roll of film. Oi's elder brother took the camera to the funeral, used the rest of the exposures, then took out the roll and sold the camera to one of the girls at the bar. The family left Phuket immediately after the ceremony, and when the brother had the roll of film developed back in Korat, he found that 3 of the earlier photos had been taken in the go-go bar. They showed his little sister up on the catwalk, dressed only in high heels and panties, with a sash made of toilet paper strung over her shoulder, bearing the words, "Miss Fuck Free." It was a game the girls played on slow nights. In all of the photos, Oi was wearing a lot of gold jewelry. Nobody in her family found it unusual or even unfair that the police report didn't mention any jewelry being recovered from the body. Eduardo did not attend Oi's funeral, but he sent a note. The note was read aloud at the cremation by Nancy, the front manageress of the go-go bar. Oi's family could not understand a word of it. Nancy's Thai is about as good as you might expect from someone whose only experience of Thailand comes from working in a bar. But 20 of Oi's co-workers were there, and a few of them could translate the contents of the note into Isan Thai. Basically, he said that while he had only known Oi for one night, he thought that she was a good girl and a very pretty girl. He was sorry that he'd caused her death. After Nancy finished reading, Oi's mother took the note and put it in the flames. Nancy will wonder for the rest of her life if that was an effort to send the young man's good wishes along with Oi to her next life, or simply an act of disgust. So that would have been a story that Nancy, Karen was her name, would have told me one night sitting out in front of the bar as I was drinking my free orange juice. I don't remember her telling me. I don't remember writing this story. It feels about 1,000 words long, so probably for the nation. A lot of the bar-centered stories in this book were written for the Phuket magazine, which had a 3,000, I think, word limit. I had to hit 1,000 words exactly every week for the nation. And to this day, almost anything I write will stop at 1,000 words. I encapsulate everything into 1,000 words now. It was 5 years of doing that every Friday. But the longer stories, the bar stories, the nation didn't want bar stories, but Phuket magazine did. So a lot of the stories that concern bar life are longer than the other stories. I'm going to do one more. I don't know what time it is. It's 43 minutes. It's almost 7 o'clock. In a minute here, the street's going to fill up with young boys on their way to the Voc Tech College down the road. And they go by every morning. It was 7:30 to 8, and then 4 to 4:30 in the afternoon, going back the other direction. This is a cul-de-sac. You got to go past Steve's house to get in and out of the government offices, the government buildings, the 2 universities down here. So I'm going to wrap it up after one more story, but I like this story. This is Steve at the age of 30 describing what he imagines his retirement will be. And, well, not 30. I was 35 when I wrote this. 35, 36, 37, somewhere in there, mid-30s. But this is how I imagine myself in my retirement in Thailand. And it's kind of what the dream was, kind of a little bit, a version of the dream that I had for 25 years in America about coming back here and retiring in this place. So this is Steve, missionary Mike, going to visit Steve's avatar in retirement. And missionary Mike was just a character I would pull out when I was writing about something that happened to me, or I just needed a character, because there were a lot of missionaries in Thailand back then. There aren't now. I haven't met a missionary in 3 years. Boy, back then you couldn't throw a rock and not hit a Christian missionary in Thailand. Look up the Sukhothai incident sometime. Is it the Sukhothai incident? No. Anyway, a couple Mormon missionaries back in those days took a selfie sitting on the head of a Buddha up in Sukhothai. And they went to jail. I don't remember how long. I think like 6 months or a year or something. Two missionaries who thought it'd be cool to sit on the head of a Buddha. That's how much training they had received before coming here in cultural sensitivity. This is called the Nutty Professor. The Nutty Pedant, we might call it now. Missionary Mike took the professor his peanut butter yesterday. Mike drove up to Talang and through the Muslim villages and parked his motorcycle at the ruined temple outside of Banmanik. He walked through a rubber plantation to a little pebble beach, only about 50 meters long. Built over the rocks at the south end of the strand was a 2-room bungalow with a moth-eaten Union Jack hung in the only window. When Mike arrived, the professor was out on the reef, his bandy rooster's legs almost black from decades in the sun and wet with spray, his long stick flipping over stones as big as your head like they were beach balls. Mike sat in the front room of his bungalow and waited, watching the professor through a hole in the British flag. The professor stalked like a heron from rock to rock, squinting against the glare of sun on water, picking out likely boulders and flipping them with a grunt. Sometimes he would scan the exposed seabed and with a soft profanity move on. Sometimes he'd lunge with an excited yell, stabbing or swinging with his stick. And once Mike saw him flip a stone only to retreat, dancing backwards over the sharp rocks from something whose spines or teeth or claws were more dangerous than the professor's stick. Eventually, he joined Mike, coming up from the beach with a jute sack full of something that preferred being under rocks. The professor greeted him with a nod and a scowl, as if Mike was a graduate student come to ask for an extension on a thesis deadline. He moved a stack of books off the room's second chair and sat down. The sack squirmed and gurgled on the floor between them. The professor nudged it with his toe and asked Mike if he was staying for supper. Mike told him no thanks, Boy was waiting for him at home. She sent you a care package, he said, handing the professor a plastic bag containing 2 ounces of pipe tobacco, 2 large bars of Swiss chocolate, a bottle of vitamins, and a 1-pound jar of peanut butter. I'm not going to try to do the British accent. It's written as if spoken in a British accent, but these days my accents, my dialect sucks, so I'm just going to put an American accent on this. Sorry. Next time, hire a real actor. Tell her thanks, the professor said. Also tell her that when she gets tired of consorting with adolescents and wants a man mature enough to appreciate her, she can find him right here. The professor began filling an old pipe. How long since you've had a smoke? Said Mike. Not too long, the professor answered. The last stuff you brought was very good, and I was working on an article. You know, I always smoke like a chimney when I write. Mike did know that. Mike also knew that although he wrote a lot, the professor hadn't been published since an article titled A Survey of Erotic Floral Symbolism in Classical Thai Poetry in the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, Volume 22, Number 6, 1974, pages 451 to 467. Which is weird. A guy, Martin Clutterbuck, who was a friend on Phuket back in the day, has published a book about Siamese cats and their appearance in classical Thai poetry. At one time, the professor's articles were coveted by scholarly journals. He once chaired the Department of Oriental Languages at Stanford University, and he was an advisor to Dean Rusk in the 1960s. He'd had permanent residency in Thailand since 1954, though at that time, his residence was a small mansion on the banks of the Chao Phraya River. He was a regular bridge player with Carol Hollinger and was one of Jim Thompson's drinking buddies. He did the first interview with Pibun in exile in Japan, and he swam at midnight in Khun Sa's Olympic-sized swimming pool in the Golden Triangle. The professor had first come to Phuket in 1969. on a grant from the Ford Foundation to prove his theory that the fabled canal across the Kra Peninsula, designed by de Lesseps for King Chulalongkorn in 1910, had actually been started in secret sometime in the 1920s, only to be abandoned under pressure from the British. Unfortunately, in 2 years of searching the length of the peninsula, he found only some ancient garbage pits and the ruins of a Japanese airbase. He did contract malaria, and in a raging fever, he came to Phuket to write up his report to the foundation. Having disproven his own theory, should that be disproved after having disproved his own theory? Having disproven his own theory? I don't know. He found his standing in the halls of academia damaged beyond repair, and himself persona non grata in literary circles. However, at that time, Farang were still few and far between on Phuket, especially Farang, who could speak the royal Thai language. He found that his modest teacher's pension from Stanford went a long way in the local economy, so he built his little bungalow on the beach and he retired into obscurity. He probably never expected to outlive his pension or to end his career in this country by digging for shellfish among the rocks. He could never have dreamed that one day he'd be reduced to accepting charity from a missionary. I wrote this when I was in my 30s. But there they were, sitting together on chairs made of driftwood, looking out through his red, white, and blue curtains at the bay. The room was filled with the odor of the professor's pipe and the mildew smell of old books. He asked Mike to read him a letter. "Misplaced my damn glasses," he grumbled. Mike knew that he'd broken his glasses 3 years ago. They fell off his nose onto the rocks as he was prying loose some muscles, but he couldn't afford to replace them, and he wouldn't accept a new pair from Mike. Better to pretend they were just misplaced and have someone read him his mail. The envelope bore an official government seal, and the signature on the letter was that of a general recently in the news. General so-and-so regretted to inform the professor of the death of an individual whose 17-syllable surname Mike didn't recognize. Another one gone, said the professor. He was a lieutenant in the Free Thai unit I was liaison to in 43. Minor nobility, a real dandy in matters of toilet and dress, but a demon from hell with a stem gun. Took up import-export after the war and then got into heavy equipment just as the building boom took off. Quite well off last time we met. He grinned and winked. Always had an eye for the ladies, that one. I imagine there are 6 or 7 elderly women fighting over the estate right now. There'll be a grand circus in the courts. He laughed out loud, took the letter from Mike, and carefully folded it back into the envelope. There were tears in his eyes. Mike liked to think they came from the laughter. The professor fiddled with his pipe for a moment, then shot a glance out the door toward the coconut trees that lined his beach. Mike followed his glance and saw a woman squatting on her heels under one of the trees. She was dressed in a sarong and appeared to be in her 40s, though in the fading light, she could have been much older or much younger. The professor sprang up and began to make gestures toward neatening up his study. Well, he chuckled. I had hoped she'd come by this evening. He went to the door and called out, Deo, Rodio, Tirak. His darling waited under the tree as instructed, while the professor ran a quick hand through his stringy white hair and over the stubble on his chin. She does my laundry and a little cleaning up, he said, though there was nothing about his clothes or the room that would indicate that was the truth. He grabbed Mike's arms and fairly dragged him off his chair, hustling him to the door and handing him his hat. Hate to see you go, old chap. I do love our visits so, and tell Bowie what I said. There's always a place for her here. He guided Mike around the soggy sack on the floor where something was trying to gnaw its way out. Careful of that, lad, he said. Love is expensive for an old man, eh? He looked at the sack and then at the woman outside, and he gave Mike a broad grin. Mike left him on his porch. And as he passed the woman on the beach, she gave him a little bow and said, "Sawadee ka." Mike returned her greeting and her smile. And when he was in the trees, he looked back. The professor was giving her a hand as she climbed the rickety steps. And then he offered his arm in a very courtly gesture. The cleaning lady, the Maban, took the arm with a possessive air that indicated she was familiar with this Western formality. Mike imagined that the professor had taught this small bit of courtesy to more than a few almond-eyed beauties in his time, at dance parties, at diplomatic missions, in the well-appointed foyers of the Bangkok idle rich, on the bow tree-shaded campuses of institutes of higher learning. The thought that the lesson was still being shared in his little house on the rocks made Mike happy as he walked back to his bike through the cathedral rows of the rubber trees. All right, that's an hour. I hope you're liking them. Maddie, I hope you have a great few days. I had thought to do this once a week, but God, it'll take me years to get through 5 books at once a week. So when I wake up abnormally early in the morning and I'm caffeinated, but it's rainy season and it looks like rain and I don't want to ride the bicycle, I'll sit down and record you an hour of stories. So it might be twice a week, once a week, 3 times, I don't know. But there you go, Maddie. Yeah, I'll talk to you later, dude.